All right, greetings everyone. This is going to be a lecture on the epistemology and metaphysics of um, René Descartes, the Frenchman. And it's interesting, whereas I might talk about Plato and Aristotle, a similar topic, and I would introduce this as a lecture on their metaphysics and epistemology, where I give metaphysics top billing. In Descartes, it's probably better to give epistemology top billing. So this is on his epistemology and metaphysics. I'm splitting hairs here. It doesn't really make that big a difference, but perhaps you'll see why in a little bit. So to begin this presentation, let me share my screen. And so we're looking, again, this is in keeping with our module on metaphysics and epistemology. And we're dealing with both of these branches of philosophy simultaneously in this course. Now, Descartes is considered the founder of modern philosophy, even though he was writing in the 1600s. And why is that? Well, we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But the short of it is that he actually shifts the emphasis on philosophical inquiry and philosophical investigations in an important way. And prior to Descartes, the metaphysicians or the philosophers that preceded Descartes, again, individuals like Plato and Aristotle and the scholastics like Thomas Aquinas, they considered metaphysics to be what they called the first philosophy. In other words, the first set of questions you want to get clear on is what is real? What is the nature of reality? What exists? How do the things that exist relate to one another? And you want to deal with your metaphysical questions and understand the nature of reality. Then once you settle the metaphysical questions, then you start to settle some of the other questions like, how do we come to know the world? Or what is my relationship to other people in the world or to the world itself? So ethics, epistemology, aesthetics, the other branches of philosophy were considered to be after you would settle those once you establish your metaphysical questions. But Descartes is going to change that. And he's going to say, no, really the more fundamental questions and the first set of questions we want to ask and answer is, how do we know? What is the nature of knowledge? Are there limits to what we can know? On what is our knowledge based? Of what can we be sure? So he shifts epistemology to being the sort of primary set of questions we need to address before moving on in our philosophical speculations. And this is, in the history of Western philosophy, this is referred to as the epistemic turn. So it's accomplished round about the 1600s. So Descartes is considered the founder of modern philosophy in the same way that Galileo, his contemporary, is considered the founder of modern physics and modern science. They're both writing in the 1600s, and of course doesn't seem that modern to us, but it's because both individuals represent an important break with the way inquiry was conducted prior to them. So, all right, so moving on. That's a little epilogue or prologue there, I suppose. How come this isn't working? There we are. So we're going to be looking at two different schools of epistemic thought here, right? And the schools of thought are the rationalists on the one hand, where they have a strong trust in what we call a priori reason and introspection. We've talked about this before. A distrust of the sensory knowledge or the senses in general as a source of knowledge, and that some ideas, and presumably the most reliable ideas, are these innate ideas, these ideas that are born in us, these a priori innate ideas. So we talked about Plato as being a representative of this rationalist school of thought. Indeed, he was. But there were three prominent rationalists that were contemporaries of Descartes, Descartes being one, right? So René Descartes is one of the rationalists. And round about the same time, you have Baruch Spinoza or Benedictus Spinoza and Gottfried Leibniz. And they're referred to jointly as the continental rationalists. And they're all called the continental rationalists because they are rationalists and they all come from the continent of Europe. Descartes was French. Spinoza was of Portuguese ancestry, but he was living in Holland at the time and his lifetime. And Gottfried Leibniz was German. Oops, hang on for a second. And share screen. There we are. Okay. Now, the rationalists, of course, are contrasted with the empiricists. And the empiricists say that the only way to acquire knowledge is through the senses, right? The slogan associated with the empiricist is, nothing is in the mind without first being in the senses, right? So notice, this is clearly then a denial of the existence of any such thing as innate ideas. There are no innate ideas. You're not born with any ideas, say the empiricist. Again, nothing is in your mind that didn't first come to you through your senses. And they share a certain confidence in reason. It's not like they denigrated reason as a source of knowledge, but mostly to be legitimate, any idea must trace back to or relate to experience. So there's not, they really didn't think that pure reason, a priori reason could deliver very much. Maybe certain logical truths or something like that, like all A is A or something, but nothing useful, right? Real useful, reliable, important knowledge is gained through experience. And this was the opinion of the empiricist. So just as there were three prominent continental rationalists, there are three prominent British empiricists. There's John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. Locke, who's English, Berkeley, who's Irish, and David Hume, who was Scottish. And so I remember giving this lecture one time and saying, well, they're called the British empiricists because they all come from the British Isles. And I had one student who apparently was of Irish descent, and he says, now what exactly are you referring to when you say the British Isles? Backing away slowly, right? Let's just say they're on the other side of the English Channel. How about that, right? So, okay, so epistemology, as we know, is the branch of philosophy that is concerned with knowledge and justification. René Descartes is a contemporary of Galileo, right? The founder of modern physics. And notice, among other things, Galileo used the telescope to investigate the solar system. So this, we'll see, was very important, and actually it figures into Descartes and his work. So there was an astrological dispute at the time of Galileo, and Descartes for that matter, about the nature of the heavens and the earth, and the nature of the heavens, its relationship to the earth, and the earth to the heavens. And the two biggest competing theories was the geocentric theory, also sometimes referred to as the Ptolemaic theory, which held that the earth is the center of the cosmos, and all the other heavenly bodies revolve around it. And this seemed to be supported by the church, right? Not exclusively so, but largely so. Right? Then there was the heliocentric contender to this view, and this was the view that was first in more recent times. There was one or two ancient Greek astronomers who had suggested that the sun is the center and the earth orbits it, but nobody took them seriously. And from the time of the ancients onward, the geocentric theory was the most widely held view. It was really the only seriously held view until Copernicus comes along. And Copernicus had suggested that maybe the geocentric theory is false, the heliocentric theory is true, and that the sun is the center of our heavenly system, and that the earth actually goes around it. So again, this was the dispute at the time. Ptolemaic system simulator. I'm wondering if I could get this to work. Perhaps. The little wheel. I'm hoping you can see this.
This short video will lead you through the process of installing a package from estro.unl.
No. This isn't at all what I expected. All right, let me stop that. All right. Well, that didn't work out. I'll have to edit. I'll fix it in the mix. What though? Well, it is important that I explain what that slide was meant to explain, right? So there's a certain amount of intuitive sense it makes to say that the Earth is fixed and does not move, and that the heavenly bodies orbit it. Why? Well, because you wake up in the morning and there's the sun, and then it goes across the sky and it's down at the western horizon at the end of the day, and poof, the next day there it is in the east again, and the moon and the various planets and stars move in a certain direction. So it certainly does look as if the heavenly bodies are going around us, right? But as data started to accumulate, as the astronomers over the centuries started accumulating more and more careful observations, they noticed that the story has to be a little more complicated than they first thought. So for instance, Aristotle had held that all of the heavenly bodies move in perfect circles, in a perfect orbit, in a uniform direction, and the Earth is the center. So there's all these concentric rings, and that the Earth is at the center, and all of the heavenly bodies orbit the Earth in these perfect circular concentric rings. But the problem is that, again, when you start being very careful about your observations, you start to notice that, let's say you're plotting the movement of Mars in the night sky. And on one night, there it is. And on the next night, there it is. And on the next night, there it is. And on the next night, there it is. Oh, it seems to have backed up. And on the next night, there it is. And there it is. And then it's there. And then it's there. It's there. So what's going on, right? So from our perspective, it almost looks like Mars is backing up in the night sky. And it's making a smooth, progressive trajectory. Then it stops and goes in the opposite direction. And then it seems to resume that smooth trajectory in the original direction. Well, that certainly it was not what Aristotle had suggested, or it seems at odds with that. So what later astronomers reasoned was that no, Mars is moving in a perfect circle around the Earth, but it's moving on a circle on that circle. So there's a circle on a circle. So Mars is sort of doing this loop-de-loop thing in the night sky. It's moving in a circle, but its circular path is also moving in a circle. And that's why, from our perspective, it looks like it's backing up, but it's not really backing up. It's making constant and even and uniform movement forward, constantly moving forward in a perfect circle, but it's a perfect circle on a perfect circle. That picture of what's going on was called an epicycle. So Mars is moving in an epicycle. That's what they taught. So they could preserve the notion that Mars is moving in a perfect circle in a uniform direction without giving up the observations, the evidence, right? That from our perspective, it looks like it's backing up, but it's not really backing up. It's sort of looping. Where am I going with this? Anyway, so the Ptolemaic system immediately started to become more complicated, having to be much more complicated than just heavenly bodies moving in circles. They're moving in circles on circles. Then it had to be further complicated because that wasn't going to do the job. Again, the more observations they acquired, they saw that wasn't going to quite answer the problem. So various other theoretical entities were manufactured so that they could keep their theory, the Ptolemaic theory, the geocentric theory. They could keep that theory intact, but modified so that it was consistent with actual observations. So as the observations seemed to disconfirm the theory, what they did was adjust the theory to account for the observations without scrapping the theory, simply by adding additional theoretical entities like the epicycle. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So when, from our perspective, Mars seems to be backing up in the night sky, or one of the other planets do this as well, they call it being in retrograde. Mars is in retrograde. I don't know if any of you follow astrology, but astrology still talks about retrograde. And they're, oh, that's why things are so crazy for you right now. Mars is in retrograde, right? And what does that mean? it means that from our perspective, it almost appears like Mars is backing up in the night sky. All right. So we have these two rival views, the geocentric theory, the Ptolemaic theory, right? Which was crazy complicated. But notice it did account for observations, and it was consistent with all the known facts for the most part. So it hadn't been, in a sense, disproven because it could accommodate the new information as new information was acquired. How did it do that? By reformatting and tweaking the theory and introducing additional theoretical hypotheses that could account for the new observations. But then you had the contender, right? The contender is the Copernicus's system, which says that it's not the case that the Earth is the center and all the heavenly bodies go around it. It's the case that the sun is the center and the Earth is actually orbiting the sun. Now, what sometimes doesn't always get a lot of press is that Copernicus's model still used perfect circular orbits. Well, when you try to model the universe or our system as sun-centered, with the Earth going around it and blah blah blah, but you plug in circular orbits, that system doesn't work very well. And so Copernicus's system was not nearly as accurate in terms of predicting alignments or predicting when things would appear in the night sky or that sort of stuff. It really wasn't as accurate as the Ptolemaic system, the one it was seeking to replace, the rival. Now, later on, another astronomer, Kepler, suggested with great reluctance near the end of his career, but Kepler suggested that the orbits are not circles, they're not perfect circles, the way Aristotle had said, that in fact they're ellipses. Oh, well, when you use the Copernican model of sun-centered system and you plug in elliptical orbits, now you have a system that works much, much better. In fact, you had a system that worked as well as the Ptolemaic system, but it had another advantage. It wasn't nearly as complicated. You didn't have to talk about diffidence and epicycles and all this other business. It was actually quite much more elegant, a much more simple system, in terms of its construction. So these two rival views, now enter Galileo into the fray here, right? These two worldviews had nearly equal explanatory and predictive powers, right? So they genuinely were rivals in terms of how well they could predict and explain what we saw in the night sky. But the heliocentric theory was much more elegant, much more simple. Nevertheless, the moon does orbit the Earth on either account. Both accounts held that the moon does not orbit the sun, that the moon orbits the Earth. So the geocentric folks were going, aha, you see, even you have to admit, you heliocentric folks, even you have to admit that the moon orbits the Earth, not the sun. But that's an aberration for yours. You want to say, oh, everything goes around the sun except the moon. At least we're consistent. We say everything goes around the Earth, including the moon. So the fact that the Earth orbits the Earth and not the moon was the sort of last remaining bit of evidence that gave the advantage, at least so it seemed, to the geocentric model rather than the heliocentric model. So far, so good. So Galileo was a prominent scientist of his day. He was actually a friend of the Pope at the time. And the Pope actually commissioned Galileo to write an analysis comparing these two rival theories, right? The Pope says, well, Galileo, you're a prominent scientist. Why don't you do an analysis of these two competing theories and see which one you like better? But when Galileo looked at other planets through the newly invented telescope, what did he find? Well, he found that these other planets had moons of their own, right? So when he looks at Jupiter, he sees Jupiter has moons. And notice the moons of Jupiter do not orbit the Earth, And the moons of Jupiter do not orbit the sun, they orbit Jupiter. So the idea that a planet can have moons which orbit it, have its own natural satellites, well, if we have evidence of that now, then the fact that the Earth has a natural satellite doesn't change the fact that the Earth might, like Jupiter, be a planet, and that all of the planets are in fact orbiting the sun, not orbiting the Earth. Therefore, there's nothing exceptional about the moon orbiting the Earth. The fact that, in fact, the new findings that other planets have moons seems to be more consistent with the heliocentric theory than the geocentric theory. This really removed the last bit of support recommending the geometric model over the heliocentric model. Galileo defended his views in a work he wrote called Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems, which he published in 1632. In 1633, Galileo was convicted of grave suspicion of heresy by the Church, by the Roman Catholic Church, based on the book. And that book was then placed on the index of forbidden books by the Catholic Church. And in fact, it was not removed from the index of forbidden books until 1833. So notice it's a pretty long run on the index, right? And Galileo was forced to recant and ended up living the rest of his life under house arrest. Now, this was a huge revolution for science, knowledge, and knowledge for that matter, in Western culture. So notice humans had been wrong, and wrong in some pretty fundamental ways, for thousands of years plus. So as long as anybody could remember, we thought the sun was going around us, and here it wasn't, it never was. And a lot of other long-held beliefs were being overturned round about the same time. Right? So the planets had moons that were not perfect spheres, as Aristotle had maintained. Right? The moon had mountains. Jupiter has a great big spot on it. So when we would, Galileo and others by that point are taking the telescope and now looking at the celestial bodies, they're finding that the celestial bodies are not nearly the way Aristotle had described them, as perfect spheres that are moving in perfect circles, that are timeless and eternal realities. No, they actually change. Venus had phases. Who knew? Well, they didn't know until they started looking at Venus through a telescope, and then they noticed, no, Venus has phases like the moon. And the moon is not a perfect sphere. Also, Aristotle had said that objects of different weight fall at different rates of speed. Do objects of different weights fall at different rates of speed? Well, as a matter of fact, no. As a matter of fact, objects of different weight fall at the same rate of speed. Galileo may not have been the very first person to prove that, but he does. And there may have been some others that proved it ahead of him. But legend has it that he dropped lead balls of different weights off the Leaning Tower of Pisa and noted that they hit the ground at the same time, right? Despite the fact that they were of different weights. It's not really clear that he did that, but that's the legend. Right? But also, remember, Aristotle had said that the motions of the spheres are perfect, where the motions of the terrestrial bodies are not perfect. And so they don't even move the same way. That's why he thought that the heavens were a fifth kind of substance, the quintessence, because they were so radically different. They were composed in such radically different ways and behaved in such radically different ways that they couldn't be made of the same substances that the terrestrial world is made of. But Galileo shows that the same math that can be used to talk about the motions of things here on Earth can be employed to talk about the motions of the celestial bodies, and that they weren't moving in importantly different ways than terrestrial bodies. Again, this is another blow to the Aristotelian scientific corpus. Galileo and this new science proved that Aristotle was wrong and always had been. Descartes was trying to deal with these new revolutions. Further, as a mathematician, Descartes is impressed by the Greek math, which still seemed to be pretty darn good, right? The Pythagorean theorem still going strong. as compared to the sort of lousy Greek physics and the science and medicine. So why is this? Descartes is wondering. Why is it that their math seems to have survived centuries and is as reliable today as it's ever been, whereas their astronomy, their meteorology, their physics, it seems to be terrible. Why the dissimilarity? Descartes decided it was a question of structure. Math had a foundation, where it begins with certain axiomatic principles, and it had a very clearly defined methodology of how you build from a foundation to additional warranted mathematical claims. So you build with proofs, and you establish corollaries, and you establish theorems, and you build your structure of math, starting with your axiomatic beginnings, and then with this very painstaking and carefully regulated, meticulous methodology. Science, the empirical science at least, had neither. Right? It didn't seem to have a clear foundational axiomatic beginnings, and it didn't have a very well worked out methodology. So Descartes thinks he's going to try to remedy this shortcoming. And so he's first going to look for something that can act as foundational, can act in the same way that the axioms of math ground math, find something that could ground knowledge in general, not just mathematical knowledge, not just biological knowledge, not just physics knowledge, but knowledge in the broadest sense. What can act as a foundation for all of knowledge? Again, he's attempting a reconciliation between the new science of Galileo and the established Christian worldview. So notice this new science, which, by the way, Descartes was a big fan of this new science. He was a big fan of the new science championed by Galileo and his colleagues. But this new science was revealing a world that was basically, from the point of view of physics, kind of dead matter that was in motion. And this motion could be described in mathematical terms, right, and followed mathematical regularities. But essentially, reality just seemed to be a bunch of billiard balls bouncing around, right? Matter being batted about, obeying the impact laws that could be expressed mathematically. And that does seem to be all that you need to talk about from a physics point of view, at least from a Galileo physics point of view, right? Is this sort of dead, or maybe dead is inanimate matter that's bouncing around according to impact laws that can be expressed mathematically. So with the rise of modern science, this modern mechanical view of reality was absolutely unavoidable, and it was an unavoidable consideration for any metaphysician. So Descartes, himself a devout Catholic, he's looking at this mechanical picture of the world, this mechanistic view of reality, right? And going, how does that square with some of my Christian commitments? And is it consistent with some of my Christian commitments? And is this a worldview I can fully embrace? Again, he liked the science. He liked the reductionism of this new science, which says, look, let's just talk in the minimalist terms necessary to explain reality. And if in fact reality can be explained, everything that need to be explained could be explained merely in terms of physical matter and motion, then maybe that's really all we should talk about. So he, as a metaphysician, as a scientist, he was sympathetic to that view. But he realized that there was deep problems with that view from the Christian perspective, the Christian worldview perspective. This new mechanistic worldview rejected the formal and final causalities of Plato and Aristotle, and it was essentially exclusively materialistic. Well, that's a bit problematic if you think there's something like an immaterial God or an immaterial soul. Unmodified, this worldview seems to suggest that reality consisted of nothing other than inanimate, unintelligent matter in motion, governed by impersonal mathematical laws. And while Descartes embraced this new science, he resisted such a view of reality. During the classical and medieval periods, anything that was able to move on its own was supposed to have an anima, that is, a soul or a life principle, which animates it to explain this self-motion. So anything that could move on its own, the medievals and the ancients would say, oh, it must have a soul, right? An anima, a life principle, which explains how this self-motion is possible. Now, they didn't necessarily think that these souls existed after the death of the organism. That's not necessarily, and it's not even clear they thought of it as an immaterial soul, the way we typically think of souls today. But they would explain self-motion by a principle, appeal to what they called the life principle, a psyche, or a soul. But by now, and by now I mean the 1600s, humans have been able to create automatons. Indeed, there were, by this point, quite a few machines that seem to move on their own, but of course they have no anima, they had no soul. Right? They're simply cleverly constructed automatons that move by weights and gears and springs and levers, etc. It is said that early on in the history of automatons, Leonardo da Vinci had created a lion, a mechanical lion, that was able to walk and roar, and then ultimately walked up to the feet of the French king and opened his mouth and dropped a bouquet of fleurs de lis at the king's feet. And that's not just apocryphal. They have working models of what they think Leonardo's lion looked like. But imagine at the time he's doing that, right? At the time he's doing that, to make something that acts like a living creature, moves by itself, and yet it's a human creation. Well, that had to look like a kind of black magic, right? That he's appropriating quasi-divine powers or something like that. But by now, these were not nearly as, by now again, 1600s, but by now these weren't nearly as uncommon or as mystical as at first they may have appeared. And so the idea that, well, something might be very cleverly constructed so that it can move on its own, but doesn't actually have a soul. People are probably becoming a little more comfortable with that view. And for that matter, Descartes was one such individual. And he thought, look, maybe we don't have to talk about animals having souls. Oh, by the way, they thought plants had souls too, because plants don't locomote, right? They don't move from place to place, but they do grow and develop on their own. So that's a kind of self-motion or self-change or self-directed change, right? But Descartes said, wait a minute, maybe we don't have to talk about plant souls or animal souls. Maybe that, like Leonardo's lion or like that clock, etc., these are simply very cleverly constructed machines, biological machines, but machines nonetheless, and that they move about because of the internal mechanisms and how they've been constructed. Might animals, and humans for that matter, be the very same, in a sense, dead matter that has been cleverly organized into self-moving systems? The new science seemed to strongly suggest so. So again, if Leonardo can construct a lion, maybe somehow biological entities were constructed in such a way. Again, they're kind of a different kind of machine, but nevertheless a biological machine. And so talk of souls is unnecessary. And we can talk about how self-motion arises even from dead or unthinking, unintelligent matter. Now, Descartes didn't like that idea, right? It's not that he didn't like that idea when applied to animals. In fact, he did embrace that idea when applied to animals. And he did deny that animals have any such thing as a soul. But he didn't like that idea when it was applied to human beings. And ultimately, it's not just that he didn't like it. He thought that that idea was ultimately unsatisfactory when applied to human beings. Why is that? Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But we do know that he wants to resist this view that the world, that this this mechanistic view, replace the worldview of Christianity with a sort of godless, amoral universe of matter in motion. Another contemporary of Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, and for that matter, even early pre-Socratic philosophers had sort of suggested this sort of view of the universe, right? Just matter and motion. And again, morality seems to be a stranger in such a world. How does moral imperatives arise from a causally determined universe of unthinking matter? Second, science cannot or must not reduce human existence, in particular the thinking self, to just a machine. Descartes wants to resist that idea. So Descartes begins his inquiry seeking a certain foundation for knowledge and science, as already noted. By the end, again, this is a spoiler alert because we're not there yet, but this is where we're going to end up. In the end, Descartes concluded that our assurance in the reliability of our own knowledge claims rests ultimately on our confidence in the goodness of an all-powerful God. And so he's going to try to show that part of our confidence in knowledge ultimately rests on God. And so we can't jettison God from our worldview. And to do so would be to undercut our knowledge claims themselves. Towards the end of his meditation number 2, in the midst of what he calls the wax argument, Descartes criticizes the assumption that it is the senses that give us certain knowledge about the world. For example, he says, on looking out of the window down on the street below, that he sees various men dressed in hats and cloaks walking by. But then he asks himself, but is it really the case that that's what I see? Right? In this case, I do not fail to say that I see men themselves, just as I say that I see the wax. And yet, what do I see from the window beyond hats and cloaks that might cover artificial machines whose motions might be determined by springs? So notice what he's saying in that particular meditation, slightly different point he's making there, but is that I say I see human beings, but that's not merely the testimony of my senses. That's going beyond the testimony of my senses. And while he thinks in that case that you're justified in going beyond the testimony of your senses, it is that rational step beyond what your senses actually give you, which allows you to say you see men walking by in cloaks, as opposed to you just see the cloaks. But I judge that there be human beings from these appearances, and thus I comprehend by the faculty of judgment alone, which is in the mind, what I believe I saw with my eyes. So he's just pointing out in this particular quote how what we arrive at as knowledge is not merely the testimony of our senses, that the useful kind of knowledge actually requires the contributions of mind and reason. All right, so his Metaphysics and Epistemology project, I think, can be divided into two parts. What I call the negative project and the positive project. And so you've seen these home improvement shows, I'm sure, where maybe a couple has a home, they want to remodel their kitchen, and they bring in the designer to help them. And one of the first things they do is they smash everything, right? They smash the counters and they smash the cupboards, and they maybe open up holes in the wall, and they just destroy a lot of stuff, right? But of course, the plan is not to leave it like that, right? They don't want the designer to go, okay, I'm done now, and leave. No. What's the point of the smashing? What's the point of destroying? Well, it's a creative destruction. You're going to smash down and then rebuild, right? And rebuild a nicer kitchen, a more modern kitchen, a more beautiful kitchen, or whatever, right? So that's kind of how I conceive of what's going on in the Meditations on the First Philosophy. The first part is essentially negative, where he's smashing things down, where he's entering into what called methodological doubt. And he's pointing out the weaknesses in some of our beliefs and why we really can't trust them, why we need to doubt them or why they are in fact doubtable, maybe to be more accurate. And that's the sort of negative side. But that's not where he wants to end the story, right? Ultimately, why is he trying to doubt things? What he's going to see is, look, if I try to doubt as much as I possibly can, and I find that there's stuff left over, stuff that no matter how hard I try, I can't doubt, well, then that is a candidate for being the foundation. And then maybe I can use that as the foundation, and then I start the positive stuff, right? The reconstruction of knowledge based on this foundation that I've discovered. So the methodological doubt is the reduction to see if anything is residual and left over and cannot be doubted. And once I find something that is indubitable or other things, maybe multiple things that are indubitable, then I do the positive thing where I rebuild an edifice of knowledge on a sure foundation. So that's the plan. So we're going to start with the negative project first, the methodological doubt. So Descartes is seeking to find something about which he can be absolutely certain, something that can act as a foundation for all knowledge. So what Descartes is seeking first and foremost is certainty, absolute certainty in some belief or set of beliefs. So to find a belief or beliefs that can act as a foundation for knowledge, he seeks beliefs which are beyond doubt. Not beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Again, that's what he means by absolute certainty, beyond a shadow of a doubt, impervious to doubt. To find a belief or beliefs that were indubitable, he tried to doubt the beliefs he already had. If he found one that he couldn't doubt, no matter how hard he tried, he would have found that certain indubitable belief. So to find an indubitable belief, Descartes subjects all of his present beliefs to doubt, to see if any of them cannot, in fact, be doubted. So he's got this catalog of beliefs, right? And he's going to subject them to doubt and see if he really tries, can he find reason to doubt them or not? And if there's any that are left over and say, well, I got rid of all of these, but look, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't doubt these. Well, then, that's what he's found, something about which he can be absolutely certain. But it would take too long for him to doubt all of his beliefs one by one, right? Well, I believe I had breakfast this morning. Could I doubt that? Yeah. Well, I believe that I drove to work today. Well, I could doubt that. Well, I believe that. It would take too long. So what he does is he takes this catalog of beliefs he has, and he subdivides that into three basic categories based on how did he acquire these beliefs. So he divides them into the three categories based on how he came to acquire the belief in the first place. The categories for his beliefs he divides again into three. The first are beliefs he has on the basis of authority. So there are certain things he believes because someone in a position of authority told him. A prominent theologian said it's such and such and so and so. Or a prominent scientist says it's such and such and so and so. Or some government authority said this is how things are. So there are certain things he believes based on authority. And for that matter, there are certain things I believe. And no doubt there are certain things you believe based on authority, right? For instance, I believe that the sun is 98 million miles away from the Earth, right? Isn't it 98 million? I have to look that up. Maybe I don't believe that after all. Now that but I don't believe because I believe because I read it in a textbook someplace, right? Other individuals, people in authority, scientists who seem to know what they're talking about, have said these things, right? So there are a lot of beliefs I have on which I have an epistemic dependency, we might say, right? I believe them, but I believe them because someone that I take to be an authority said it was so, and therefore I believe it. But then there are certain things I believe not because I'm taking somebody else's word for it, but because of my own experience. I've seen it with my own eyes, I've heard it with my own ears, I've touched it with my own hands. And so these are beliefs I have based on my own experience. And then, in addition to things I believe because I've seen it with my own eyes, there are certain beliefs I have based on reason. For instance, I believe that A triangle is a closed figure having exactly 3 straight sides, and that the interior angle of a triangle is 180 degrees. I remember working that out one time in a geometry class many years ago, many years ago. I believe that 2 plus 2 is 4. Right? I believe that all bachelors are unmarried. So there are certain things I believe based on reason, not based on experience. I believe that all bachelors are unmarried, not because I went door to door and I asked every bachelor I came across, are you married? No, it's a truth of reason. It's a conceptual truth. So again, I have a wide category of belief, as does Descartes, but some of them are beliefs based on authority. Some of them are beliefs based on my own individual experiences, and some of them are beliefs based on reason alone. Now, what he wants to say is, given these 3 categories, are they doubtable? Are any of these categories furnishing us with beliefs which are indubitable? Or are they all subject to doubt? Well, and I'm not quite sure how the slides are laid out, so I'm just going to talk through it, and maybe I'll be repeating myself in a moment. But ask yourself, could you doubt beliefs based on authority? So you believe that the Earth is 93 million miles away from the Earth, from the sun. I think that's it, 93 million, yeah, now that I think about it. And I believe it because someone in a position of authority told me, but might I be wrong? Yeah, right, those are doubtable. Why? Well, because that authority individual might be mistaken. That individual himself or herself might have made a mistake when they were doing their calculations. Well, for that matter, maybe they're deceiving me. Maybe it wasn't an honest mistake. Maybe they're actually lying to me. They want me to believe this for one reason or another. Now, I don't think so. I don't think any of them are. But is that possible? Yes. So if that authority figure could possibly have been wrong or possibly be deceiving me, then my beliefs based on that authority are doubtable. So, says Descartes, well, then I have to box up all of those beliefs I have based on authority. I have to put them up on a shelf, and I can't be using those as the foundation of knowledge because they're dubitable. They're doubtable. I can't be certain that any of them are true. But I have 2 more categories of beliefs. So now we look at beliefs based on our senses. Well, there's certain things I've seen with my own eyes, heard with my own ears, felt with my own hands, etc. Are these doubtable beliefs? And at first he goes, well, I remember one time I thought there was water up on the road in front of me. It was a hot day. And then as I drove closer, I saw that there wasn't water after all. This was some sort of illusion, some sort of optical illusion caused by, well, in this case, water vapors, but never mind that. Or sometimes I've seen a stick half submerged in water and it appears to be bent. But then when I take the stick out of the water, I find out it's not bent at all. Again, I've been deceived. Oh, well, then I guess I can't trust things that I've seen with my own eyes or heard with my own ears. And Descartes said, well, wait a minute, though. Maybe that's too fast. Maybe that's too fast, right? Because, all right, the observation conditions were a little weird, right? It's half in water or it's at a distance or whatnot. And it's one minor aspect of my experience that I'm deceived about. I'm not deceived that there was a stick or there was a glass of water. I was just deceived about some aspect. Right? A more important question is this. Have I ever been deceived not by some mere aspect of my present experience, but by the totality of my present experience? Have I ever been completely deceived about where I was, what I was doing, what activities I was engaged in, who else was present, what was going on? Have I ever been totally deceived about every single feature of my experience? Well, actually, Descartes says, you know what? I have. In fact, on a regular basis, I am deceived in just such a way. And he's willing to bet that you all have had such experiences where you've been totally deceived about where you are, what you've been doing, who else is present, etc. When have you been so deceived? When have you been deceived so you thought you were someplace you actually were not? You thought you were doing something you actually weren't doing. You thought you were dressed a particular way that you weren't in fact dressed. You thought that people were present who really were not present. You've been totally buffaloed, totally deceived about every aspect of the experience. When has that happened to you? Well, maybe you're already thinking about this, right? When I was in the Matrix, sort of. No, but the Matrix is a good example. No, when you dream, right? When you dream, you think you're doing something you're not actually doing. You think you're dressed in some way you're not actually dressed. Sometimes you think you're not dressed, but in fact you are. Maybe I'm confessing too much about my dreams. But again, you see that in your dreams, you are totally deceived. Your senses are totally mistaken in the information they provide. Now, it's important to see what Descartes is talking about here. He's not saying, oh, maybe I'm dreaming right now. That's not really his point. His point is, if in dream experience, I can have rich, sensuous content that is telling me nothing about the reality of the objective world, then how can I have any confidence that this sensuous content is telling me anything about the objective world? I know that, it's not so much that he thinks he might be dreaming, is that dreams show us that the compelling nature of our experience does not necessarily guarantee that that experience is veridical, that that experience is accurately giving us information about the objective world. So even if I'm not dreaming right now, of course I don't think I am, can I take any confidence in the experiences that I'm having about a monitor before me or a camera or the rest? Descartes wants to say no. I have to doubt it. It's doubtable. Maybe the reality I'm experiencing at this very moment is no more reliable than dreamed realities. And so those things I believe based on my senses, I have to box those up. I put them in the little shoebox. They go up on the shelf, up to next to the beliefs based on authority, because they are doubtable. They cannot act as the foundation of knowledge, and they are not absolutely certain. They are subject to doubt. But we have one category left: belief based on reason. You might be thinking, oh, he's a rationalist. He probably saves these. He probably says these are okay. But you'd be wrong. Okay? Again, spoiler. Well, it's not a spoiler, I'm telling you. Why? He says, look, whether dreaming or awake, I know that all bachelors are unmarried. I know that 2 + 2 = 4. I know that all triangles have 3 sides, right? Whether dreaming or awake, these things don't seem to depend on the veracity of my experience, my sensuous experience. So can I be confident? Can I be absolutely certain that these beliefs are true, are reliable? Might these be the foundations that I'm looking for? But he concludes no. And the reason he concludes this is, it's a little bit of a stretch, but stay with me. He says, look, of course I believe in a perfectly good God. Of course I believe in that, right? He was a Catholic, and he didn't want to get himself into trouble with the Catholic Church like Descartes, like Galileo did, right? So he says, of course I believe in God. And I believe that this God is good. But imagine, instead of a good God, there was a being who was as powerful as God, but instead of being honest and good, he was a deceiver, a kind of deceiving trickster God. Is such a being possible? Now, again, you have two choices. You can say, no, it's absolutely impossible that any such being exists. But why? Or you could admit, yeah, I guess that's possible. I don't think it's true, mind you, but let's say it's possible. Okay, if such a being exists, this evil trickster, genius, demon, right? Could such a being be deceptive enough, evil enough, and powerful enough to confuse my mind when I try to do something as simple as add 2 + 2? And so I'm trying to add 2 + 2, and I conclude, but he does something before I'm done, and I conclude 4, but it's not 4. He's tricked me into thinking that the answer is 4 when the answer is something else, or something more fundamental. Could such an evil, powerful demon confuse me even of beliefs based on reason. Again, you have two options. You can say, no, that's impossible. Even though he's as powerful as God and he's malevolent, he couldn't deceive you that way. Or you could admit, yeah, a powerful being like that could deceive me, even of basic truths, like the truths of reason. But if that's the case, if such a being is possible, and if such deception is possible, then it is possible to doubt truths of reason. So even truths of reason are dubitable. Even these need to be packed up and put up on the shelf. And they cannot act as the foundation of knowledge, and they are not something about which we can be absolutely certain. Oh dear. So where does that leave us? In a pretty sorry state. We're almost at the end of the methodological destructive project, and we've been pretty destructive. He finds each of the categories doubtable. He finds the number one, beliefs based on authority are doubtable. Why? Because the authorities themselves might be lying or simply mistaken. Number two, beliefs based on your own personal experience is doubtable because my senses are not sufficiently keyed into reality and therefore not sufficiently reliable, as dream experience proves. And even number three, truths based on or beliefs based on reason are doubtable because I cannot be certain that an evil demon does not exist who is so powerful that he could fool even my reason. If such a being is possible, and there's no reason to suppose he isn't, then I could be wrong when I draw conclusions based on reason. Is anything indubitable? Well, again, Descartes' in a sorry state, and he's asking himself, might I be wrong, even in thinking that I exist? Might the evil demon be so powerful as he confuses me into thinking that I exist when I don't really exist at all? Could I doubt, for instance, my own existence? Let me try to doubt my own existence. I doubt that. Let me try that again. I doubt. No. I doubt. Impossible. And why is that? Well, because in the very act of doubting, I am aware. I am indubitably aware that I am the agent of the doubting. I exist. I know that I exist in the very act of any kind of doubting because it is I that is doing the doubting. Now, of course, this can be broadened to any form of cognition: doubting, hoping, wondering, wishing, thinking. And this is what leads Descartes to his famous pronouncement: I think, therefore I am. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And I do want you to know the Latin. You are a college-educated person now, so, right? So the Latin is cogito, I think, ergo, therefore, sum, I am. Now, it's not like I think I'm rich, therefore I'm rich. No. What he means by that is in the very act of cognizing, in the very act of thinking, you are absolutely, immediately, and indubitably aware of and assured of your own existence. It is I that think. I am the thinking thing, right? I'm the thing with thoughts, right? I'm the one doing the thinking or the doubting or the wondering or whatnot. Now, again, the cogito, I think, therefore I am, even though it has the word therefore in it, do not think of the cogito as an argument. Right? It's not an argument. It's an immediate awareness. It's an intuition. What he says is it becomes clear and distinct before the mind's eye. Again, a kind of indubitable phosphorescence, right? It's impossible to doubt my existence in the act of thinking. Okay, fine. He's got something he knows and of which he can be absolutely certain. What can he be absolutely certain of? That he exists. Okay, fine. Now what, right? So right now, he's kind of stuck with the I exist. Well, what about everything else? What about the rest of the world? What about other people, et cetera, et cetera? I don't seem to know anything except that I exist. Well, that's not where he wants to stay. Remember, the whole point of the destructive project and tearing things down is to build things up. So he's got a foundation. What's the next step? Because right now he seems to be stuck in a position known as solipsism. Right? Solipsism is the view which says, I know that I exist, but for all I know, I'm the only thing that exists, and everything else is a figment of my imagination. Right? That's what solipsism maintains. Right? Solipsism is the belief that one is the only thing which exists in the universe, and everything else is part of one's imagination. I had a colleague who, not at this institution, a different institution, but often he would put on one of his final exams, write an essay proving solipsism is false. And he had it's a challenge, right? But how would you prove that you're not the only thing which exists and that there is a mind-independent reality in addition to your experiences of the world? And what would you base that argument on? Your experiences? Your reason? Anyway, Descartes does not want to be a solipsist, of course, right? He wants to actually ground genuine knowledge and scientific knowledge at that. So Descartes claims that the mind is different. This is a brief aside into Descartes' theory of mind. We're actually going to spend some time on Descartes' theory of mind later on in this course, but I do want to touch on it here, and then we'll revisit it a little later on. But Descartes claims that the mind is different from the body. And one of his arguments for why he thinks the mind and the body are two different things is because one can doubt one has a body. He's doubting he has a body. He sees that a body, but he can't be sure that it's real. But one can't doubt that one has a mind. One can't doubt that one is a thinking thing. That I'm thinking is indubitable. So I can doubt I have a body, can't doubt that I have a mind. Therefore, he says, it must be the case that the mind and body are two different things. Because one has a property, being doubtable, that the other one doesn't. The mind is not doubtable. Now, this actually is not a great argument, though. He gives others, I think, that are better. For instance, I don't doubt that Peter Parker is meeting me for tea this afternoon. But I do doubt that Spider-Man is meeting me for tea this afternoon. Does that in and of itself prove that Peter Parker is not Spider-Man? No, it doesn't. Ooh, spoiler alert. Hopefully you knew that. Okay. But Descartes gives us other reasons for thinking that the mind and body are distinct that I think are a little bit better. In general, he points out that mental things, or ideas, we might say, have properties that physical things do not have, and that physical things have properties that mental things do not have. Right? So he talks about res cognitans and res extensia, right? Things of thought and things of extension or physicality, materiality. So for instance, he thinks the mind is immaterial, not a body. It has no location in space. It's not extended. So where exactly is my memory of my grandmother's kitchen? Where exactly in space is my love for my wife? Well, they don't exist in space. They seem to have no location. Mental things are private. So I and I alone have access to my mind and know what I'm thinking. You don't. You might guess, you might surmise, you might infer, but you can't think my thoughts. You don't have access to them. Only I have access. It's private to me and to me alone. Whereas the body is public, right? You have better access to my body than I do. You can see my elbows. I've never been able to see my elbows, never will. I can see my reflections of my elbows or video images of my elbows, but I can't actually look at my elbows, right? If I want to know whether I have a tumor or not, I can't introspect. Yes, I have. No, I actually have to go to a doctor, find out if I have a tumor. So other people have access to my body more reliably than I do because my body is public. But they don't have access to my mind. So I can determine, like, do I have a headache? Yes, I do, right? All I have to do is introspect. Am I hungry? Yes, I am. Right? So I can find out things about my mind merely through introspection because it's private, not the body. And the other distinction is that things about mental beliefs are incorrigible, meaning they're not subject to correction. So if I told you I had a headache and you went, no, you don't have a headache. You just think you have a headache. Look, if I think I have a headache, I have a headache. I might be wrong about what the cause of my headache is, but I'm not wrong about the fact that I have a headache. You can't be wrong about that. If I seem to see a dagger in front of me, I can't be wrong about seeming to see a dagger in front of me. Now, maybe there is no dagger in front of me, right? And you might convince me that how the world seems to me is not how the world is, but that's to talk about the external world. That doesn't change the fact that I seem to see a dagger. Right? So mental things seem to be incorrigible in a way that claims about the physical world are corrigible, correctable, right? You might be mistaken. Also, since Descartes conceives of matter as essentially unthinking, and he conceives of himself as essentially a thinking thing, he cannot be identical with his body. So if matter is, by definition, unthinking stuff extended in space and time, but mind is thinking stuff, well, then mind can't be a matter and matter can't be mind. Quoting from Descartes, he says, therefore, merely because I know with certitude that I exist, and because, in the meantime, I do not observe that aught necessarily belongs to my nature or essence beyond my being a thinking thing, I rightly conclude that my essence consists only of my being a thinking thing, or a substance whose whole essence or nature is merely thinking. So he conceives of himself merely and only as a thinking thing. The only thing essential to his nature is that he is a thinking thing, and that's his entire essence. Also, since Descartes can, I think I said this already. Yeah. And although quoting, this is a further quote from that previous one. And although I may, or rather, as I shortly say, although I certainly do, possess a body with which I am very closely conjoined, nevertheless, because on the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, and as far as I am only a thinking, unextended thing, and as, on the other hand, I possess a clear and distinct idea of body, as far as it is only an extended and unthinking thing, it is certain that I, that is, my mind, by which I am what I am, is entirely and truly distinct from my body, and I may exist without it. So what he's saying is, look, mind and body are simply two different things. They have these different properties. I'm essentially a thinking thing. Matter is essentially not thinking. They're distinct. And I'm just not my body. And so I might be conjoined to it for the time being, but I'm not identical with it. Thus, for Descartes, there's actually two kinds of substances besides God. He thought God was a third substance unto himself. Don't worry about that. So Descartes was a dualist, metaphysical dualist, who claims that reality is explained by two different kinds of substances. Material substance, which explains our body, and immaterial substance, which explains mind. And not only are there two different substances, but they are radically different. So notice he's actually defining them in opposition to one another. Dualism has problems when it comes to being a theory of mind, right? So for instance, how does what is immaterial interact with what is material? Right? An objection was raised to Descartes, where does the mind touch the body? Right? So how could the two possibly interact? If really immaterial you don't exist anywhere, and yet somehow the dualists believe that your mind is making use of your body and moving your body around and tied to your body's sensations. So how do you account for that? How do you account for this apparent interaction between a non-spatial immaterial mind and a spatial body? And again, keep in mind, I mean, people talk about, well, astral projections or astral bodies or whatnot. And if you're thinking about stuff you see on the History Channel about, photographs of ghosts, you don't have in mind what Descartes has in mind. When he talks about immaterial, he means in the same way that the number 2 is immaterial. The number 2 does not exist in this room or in the room next door. The number 2 doesn't walk through walls because the number 2 doesn't have a body. It's not in space. So the question is if your mind is like that, it's like that number 2, why is your mind uniquely tied to this one particular body, one particular location, etc.? Well, a dualist like Descartes is going to have to give some sort of account for that. All right, but back to, let's go, never mind his philosophy of mind for the time being now, back to his epistemology. Descartes wants to get rid of the possibility of an evil demon so that he doesn't have to worry about doubting reason. What's the only thing that could get rid of something evil and as powerful as an evil God? Well, the only thing that's big enough and good enough to do the job would be God. Right? So what Descartes is going to try to do is prove the existence of God. Why? Because if God exists, then the evil demon doesn't. It couldn't possibly exist, right? The universe isn't big enough for 2 omnipotent beings. So if the only omnipotent being existing is good, then we know there isn't some sort of evil omnipotent being. Descartes therefore attempts to prove that God exists. But how? He knows that he's a thinking thing, therefore he's a thing with thoughts, and one of these thoughts happens to be the thought of God. So he tries to go from the fact that he has an idea of God to certain knowledge that God exists. Now, he gives a couple different arguments in the Meditations for the existence of God. This is the only one I'm going to look at. Right? So remember his program, right? I think, therefore I am. Okay, what am I? I'm a thinking thing. Okay, what else are you? Well, I'm a thing with thoughts. You might go, well, those are awfully kind of minor. Yeah, but remember, he wants to do baby steps, right? He thinks science and knowledge got itself into big trouble by moving leaps ahead. So just like a mathematician does corollaries and proves theorems and does small steps that accumulate to something large, he's trying to do the same. So I'm a thinking thing, I'm a thing with thoughts. Oh, here's a thought, right? I've got all kinds of thoughts, but here's a thought. I have a thought of God. So what? Well, here comes his argument. Proposition number 1, I have an idea of a perfect being, God. Right? Where does this come from? It follows from introspection, right? As he's going through his catalog of beliefs, right? Beliefs in a body, beliefs in an external world, beliefs that all bachelors were married. Oh, but here's another belief, God. I have a belief, idea of God, an idea of God. So that I have an idea of a perfect being. Therefore, I have a perfect idea, follows from premise 1. But, he says, an effect cannot be greater than its cause. This is either a metaphysical principle or a physical principle, but let's talk about the physics of that, for instance, right? If I put a pot of water onto an electric burner, and that electric burner gets to be 200 degrees, but no hotter than 200 degrees, well, then that pot of water is never going to boil. Why? Well, because the boiling temperature for water, as you know, should know, is a 212 Fahrenheit, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, it can't get to 212 degrees Fahrenheit if it only heats to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So in other words, the effect can't be greater than its cause. And we can broaden that into a general metaphysical principle. It is never the case that an effect is greater than its cause. So he introduces that as premise number 3. We'll just call it a metaphysical principle. But, he reasons, I am not perfect. Now, how does he know he's not perfect? Oh, for goodness sakes, it's pretty clear he's not perfect. He has all these doubts. He doesn't know if he has a body, narrowly avoiding solipsism, etc. So he's clearly not perfect. But if that's true, then he says, I cannot be the cause of my perfect idea. Well, that seems to follow from premise 3 and premise 4. But further, from premise 3, sort of a corollary to premise 3, only a perfect being could be the cause of a perfect idea. Why? Well, because an effect can't be greater than its cause. So you can't get a perfect idea from an imperfect cause. You could only get a perfect idea from a perfect cause. Therefore, a perfect being exists. That's what he has in line 7. And he thinks that follows from premise 2 and premise 6. And if that's true, then it follows God exists. And not just any old God, but a perfect God. All good, all powerful, all loving, flawless. So he thinks he has now demonstrated that an all good, all powerful God exists. Essentially, he's arguing that since he has the idea of God, the only thing that could explain the fact that he has an idea of God is God, and therefore God exists. Now, we'll talk about that argument in a minute. I don't think it's a very good argument, but let's set that aside for a minute. Where does his project go after this? Well, this means, number one, there is no evil demon. Why? Because the universe isn't big enough for two omnipotent beings. But if that's true, then we can trust reason and math. So now we can go up onto the shelf, we can get reason and math, we can bring that down, and we can have trust in reason and trust in math. Why? Because God is good. He's not an evil deceiver. He's not going to be playing games with our mind. Oh, by the way, I should mention George Orwell, where he gets Simpson to admit, not just say, but to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. That was Orwell's sort of homage to Descartes and Descartes' evil demon, right? Except in his novel, 1984, it's the state that became so powerful and so malevolent that it could confuse people and convince them even of, and deceive them even of truths of reason. So just a little aside there, but back to Descartes, right? So he thinks he's gotten rid of the evil demon because he's proven God. And so the evil demon is not a possibility, and therefore we can trust reason. But further, because God is good, and we have been created by God and made for the world, and the world was made for us, we can trust our senses, so long as we do not extend our will to believe beyond what the evidence warrants. So Descartes, in a qualified way, restores our confidence in things we believe based on our senses. So we take those boxes and we put that down. Now he says it's always possible to push your willingness to believe something beyond the evidence that you've been given. And when you do that, you err. It's not God's fault. It's because you're using your will beyond its what you're justified in using it to believe. But why? Well, because God's not a deceiver. So he wouldn't set up the whole world so as that it's not at all the way we take it to be. He made us for the world and the world for us. And so when we use our sensory apparatus the way he intended, we arrive at beliefs that are more or less accurate. Notice, though, he never attempts to restore authority as a mode of justification. Individual authority replaces institutional authority. This is a radical idea compared with, say, Thomistic scholasticism, ushering in modern philosophy, right? The modern era. Not error, era. There we go. This is among the reasons that Descartes is called one of the first modern philosophers, right? Because they're saying, no, it's no longer, well, the church says so, therefore it must be true, or, well, the authorities say so, therefore it must be true. Now you have this different orientation. Wait a minute. What do I think? What am I willing to accept? What are you able to prove to me, right? Again, God's very close to the foundations of knowledge for Descartes. But even more fundamental than that is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Again, that kind of individualism that's at the heart of this. So notice our trust in our mind and our trust in our senses depend on our trust in a benevolent, good, and powerful God, according to Descartes. If we didn't live in a divinely governed, benevolent universe, we would have no reason to trust our mind or trust our senses, according to Descartes. So if you give up on God, you have to give up on your own ability to know, says Descartes. Again, absent the notion of God, on what grounds can you trust your reason or your senses? Descartes would say none. Oh, none. Okay, but let's take a look at that argument that Descartes offered, right? Going from his idea of God to God's existence. There are three major problems with that argument, at least three. Number one, he goes from the claim that he has a perfect idea of God, or the idea of a perfect being, let's put it that way. He goes from the fact that he has the idea of a perfect being to the claim that he has a perfect idea. But that's not necessarily true. It may not be a perfect idea. He may, in fact, have an imperfect idea of a perfect being. Now, if what he has is an imperfect idea, then you don't need a perfect cause for an imperfect idea. You could have an imperfect cause for an imperfect idea. Descartes himself might be the source of his imperfect idea. Yes, Descartes' imperfect, but again, if the idea itself isn't perfect, then it doesn't need a perfect cause. Now, and again, what would a perfect idea be like exactly? Would it be limitless? Would it be like an idea of everything all at once? I mean, would that be what? It's not clear that what a perfect idea is, or more to my point, it's not clear at all that Descartes has one. Notice, I might have an idea of a stinky cheese, but that doesn't mean my idea is stinky, right? My idea is emitting some sort of foul odor, right? So even if I had an idea of a perfect being, it doesn't mean the idea itself is perfect any more than the idea of a stinky cheese is itself stinky. Second, he makes the claim that the effect cannot be greater than its cause. But either this is some sort of physical principle or it's a metaphysical principle. But if it's a physical principle, it's a principle we came to believe based on our senses, and he's supposed to be doubting things he believes based on his senses. Or if it's a metaphysical principle, perhaps it's something we believe based on reason, but he's supposed to be doubting reason. So notice where he is in the project. He's got beliefs of reason up on the shelf. He's got beliefs of the senses up on the shelf. How did he sneak this one down without anybody noticing? Where did this idea come from? So, of course, that's not something he is licensed to do, and I think that's a problem with his argument. But then third, and probably most obvious, is it's an argument. Now, this is someone who's supposed to be not confident that he could add 2 + 2 and come up with the right answer. So if he's doubting reason, why does he have any faith that his conclusion of this rather elaborate argument is reliable? Again, given his particular circumstance, he shouldn't be arguing at all. Right? It should just be sort of a clear and distinct before the mind's eye kind of immediate intuition, and that's not what this is. This is actually an argument. So notice objection number 2 and objection number 3 arise primarily because where Descartes is in his project. He's supposed to be doubting reason, and he's supposed to be doubting his senses. Objection 1 is an objection to this argument regardless, right? It just seems like a flawed move, and it's not because of the peculiar circumstance Descartes finds himself in. It's simply that you can't go from an idea of X to an X idea. Again, he was looking for something basic principle to explain all. I don't know. I don't know where that came from. Sorry. So that concludes Descartes, our foray into Descartes, his metaphysics and epistemology, right? Perhaps not entirely successful. So let me stop sharing. So remember that I outlined 2 parts, his methodological doubt, how he divides beliefs into 3 categories, how he finds each of these 3 categories doubtable, and ultimately ends up, though, with an undoubtable belief, I exist, cogito ergo sum. Then he tries to go from that belief, cogito ergo sum, to building up an edifice of knowledge. I'm a thinking thing, I'm a thing with thoughts, I have an idea of God, only God could be could account for my idea of God, therefore there's no evil demon, oh, I get reason back, God's not a deceiver, oh, I get the senses back, never tries to get authority back. So that's his project. Of course, this caused a big stir, people were confused, challenged this, and the next philosopher we're going to look at, John Locke, is a contemporary of Descartes and really believes that Descartes is not successful in his positive reconstruction of knowledge. What Locke is going to say is, look, Descartes simply set the bar too high because Descartes is looking for absolute, undoubtable certainty. And maybe that's not something human beings can get. Maybe human beings have to content themselves with something less than absolute certainty. And in fact, if that's the case, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we can get by with less than what Descartes was looking for. So that's another day. I'm going to conclude this session. And so until next time, thank you.